He always thought I was soft, until Christmas morning. One slap became his one-way ticket to hell. Because under that tree weren't just presents. They were 3 months of my work. Bank statements, emergency orders, and a paper trail leading straight to an interrogation room. By the time the red and blue lights flooded our living room, Victor finally understood. This year's tree wasn't decorated with candy canes. It was decorated with his fate, wrapped in federal evidence tape and tied with a bow of wire fraud charges. My name is Lauren Pierce, and I learned early that the most dangerous predators wear the nicest masks. At 29, I'd built a career as a compliance specialist at ArcLight Compliance in Raven Harbor, Maine, a job that taught me to spot patterns others missed. But it took me 3 years to see the pattern right in my own home. Victor Hale married my mother, Denise, 5 years ago, to the outside world. He was Raven Harbor's golden boy, founder of the Redwood Veterans Relief Fund, generous donor at every church fundraiser, the man who'd shake your hand with both of his and remember your kids' names. At Chamber of Commerce dinners, he'd hold court at the head table, regaling everyone with stories of 7-figure sponsorship deals and his latest initiatives for homeless vets. At home, he was different, not violent, not at first, just controlling. He insisted on managing Mom's finances to protect her from scams. He moved her retirement accounts to better-performing funds that only he could access. When she wanted to visit her sister in Portland, he'd check the joint account first, frowning at imaginary expenses. The deed to our family home, the one my father left us before he died, somehow needed to be restructured for tax purposes. Mom had been strong once, after Dad's death. She'd raised me alone, working 2 jobs while finishing her nursing degree. But grief makes us vulnerable, and loneliness makes us blind. By the time I moved back from Boston to be closer to her, she was already deep in Victor's web, signing papers she didn't read, accepting explanations that didn't quite add up. The first real red flag came last September. I was helping Mom organize receipts for taxes when I noticed something odd. Several large donations to the church had been processed through a vendor called North Coast Outreach LLC instead of directly. When I asked Victor about it, he laughed. That practiced, dismissive laugh that made you feel stupid for asking. "Lauren, sweetheart, you work in compliance. You should understand corporate efficiency. We batch process through approved vendors for better rates. It's all above board." But I knew vendor batching, and this wasn't it. The addresses were wrong. The EIN numbers followed a pattern I'd seen before in shell company investigations, and Victor's explanation had that rehearsed quality of someone who'd practiced it in the mirror. I started keeping notes, not accusations, just observations, the way he'd announce a new major donor to the fund, but never introduce them at events. How the fund's holiday gala raised $200,000 according to the program, but the public filing showed $450,000 in donations that quarter. The construction company that won the bid to renovate the Veterans Center, owned by Victor's college roommate, despite bidding 30% higher than competitors. Don't argue. Document. That became my mantra. Every overheard phone call, every suspicious invoice, every time Mom asked about her savings and Victor changed the subject. I photographed documents when he was at his office. I noted dates, amounts, names. I learned to smile at Sunday dinners while memorizing the letterhead on papers he'd carelessly left on his desk. The house was the breaking point. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I heard them arguing. Or rather, I heard Victor talking and Mom agreeing in that defeated tone she'd adopted. He wanted to transfer the house into something called the Hale Family Trust. For estate planning, he said, to protect our assets. Our assets, the house my father had built with his own hands, where my height marks still climbed the kitchen door frame, where Mom had planted her rose garden the year I graduated high school. Our house was becoming his asset. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my laptop, using every research skill I'd learned at ArcLight. The Hale Family Trust had been created just 6 months ago. Victor was the sole trustee with broad discretionary powers. Mom was listed as a beneficiary, but the language was dense, circular, designed to confuse. In essence, Victor would control everything, and Mom would need his permission to access what was supposedly hers. I thought about confronting him directly, but men like Victor don't respond to confrontation. They escalate. And Mom was too deep in his influence to see the truth without proof. Irrefutable, documented, legal proof. So I started planning. If Victor wanted to play games with paperwork and legal structures, I'd play too. But I'd play to win. And Christmas, his favorite holiday, when he'd host his grand party for donors and city officials, would be my deadline. I called it Operation Knoll. And unlike Victor's schemes, everything I did would be completely legal. The beauty of working in compliance is that you develop a sixth sense for financial irregularities. At ArcLight, I spent my days untangling corporate webs, tracking money through layers of LLCs and offshore accounts. It was like solving puzzles where every piece was deliberately mislabeled. Victor had no idea he'd married into a family with a human audit machine. I started with what I could access legally. Public records showed the Redwood Veterans Relief Fund had raised $4.8 million over 3 years. Impressive for a small city like Raven Harbor. But their reported program expenses? Only $1.2 million. The rest was categorized as administrative costs and vendor services. That's a 75% overhead rate, enough to trigger an IRS audit at any legitimate nonprofit. The vendor services were the key. North Coast Outreach LLC, Hale Consulting, Patriot Support Services, all registered to the same P.O. box in downtown Raven Harbor, all formed within 6 months of each other, all with the same registered agent, a law firm known for asking no questions if the retainer was large enough. At work, I had access to corporate databases for due diligence checks. On my lunch breaks, I'd run searches, careful to stay within the bounds of my authorized use policy. The shell companies were textbook. No real employees, no physical offices, no web presence, just bank accounts and invoices. The pattern emerged like a photograph in developer fluid. Donation comes into Redwood Veterans Relief. Within days, an invoice appears from North Coast Outreach for Veteran Support Services. The fund pays the invoice. North Coast then pays Hale Consulting for strategic planning, and from there, the money vanishes into what I suspected were Victor's personal accounts. $3.2 million. That's how much had moved through this pipeline in 3 years. Meanwhile, at home, Victor was tightening his grip on Mom's finances. He'd convinced her to give him power of attorney just for convenience. He brought the papers to dinner, already filled out. A notary friend waiting in the living room with his stamp ready. "Denise, honey, it's just paperwork. If something happens to you, I need to be able to pay the bills, handle the insurance. You trust me, don't you?" Mom's hand shook as she signed. I watched from the doorway, my phone recording in my pocket. When Victor asked me to witness the signature, I declined. "I can't be a witness to a document I haven't read thoroughly," I said, keeping my voice level. Professional habit. His jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue without seeming suspicious. The notary witnessed it instead, though I made sure to get a clear photo of his license plate as he left. That night, I called Maya Kincaid, a lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse and domestic situations. We'd met at a conference 2 years ago, and she'd given me her card with a knowing look. "Sometimes the danger is closer than we think," she'd said. "It's not elder abuse if the victim is only 55. I told her. "No, but financial coercion is still illegal, and powers of attorney obtained under duress can be revoked. Start documenting everything. Get me copies of everything you can legally access. And Lauren, be careful. When money's involved, people get dangerous." I expanded my evidence collection every Sunday. While Victor held court at his veterans' breakfast meeting, I'd photographed documents in his home office. I found bank statements for accounts Mom didn't know existed, contracts with vendors who didn't seem to exist beyond paper, and most damning, a ledger, handwritten, showing the real flow of money. Victor was old school enough to keep physical records of his digital crimes. The entries were in code, but codes are just another kind of pattern. NCV appeared next to large sums, always followed by smaller amounts marked VH Personal. North Coast Vendor, Victor Hale. He was literally writing down his theft. I cross-referenced everything. Every fake invoice had a matching withdrawal. Every deposit to Victor's personal accounts traced back to a veterans fund payment. The few legitimate expenses, a small veterans picnic, some branded merchandise, were dwarfed by the systematic looting. By early December, I had enough evidence to destroy him. Forensic accounting reports prepared on my own time, flowcharts showing the money trail, copies of forged signatures on vendor contracts. Victor had gotten sloppy, signing the same name the same way too many times. I opened a safety deposit box at a bank where Victor had no accounts. Everything went in there, with copies stored on encrypted drives in 3 separate locations. I also began preparing packages for the FBI, the IRS, the State Attorney General, and the Redwood Veterans Relief Fund Board of Directors. But I needed one more thing, a trigger, something that would make it impossible for Victor to claim ignorance or blame others, something that would protect Mom from retaliation. That's when I decided to give him exactly what he wanted for Christmas, a chance to steal everything, right before I took it all away. The Christmas tree stood in the corner of our living room like a witness to a crime. Victor had insisted on the 12-foot Fraser fir, decorated with military precision, white lights evenly spaced, ornaments color-coordinated, everything perfect for the donor reception he'd host on December 23rd. But perfection is often the prettiest lie. I stood there on December 20th, holding an empty box wrapped in silver paper. Mom had gone to bed early, exhausted from preparing for Victor's party. He was at another emergency board meeting, which I knew meant drinks at the country club with his accomplice contractors. The house felt hollow, like it was holding its breath. The empty box wasn't random. When I was 7, the Christmas after Dad got sick, there'd been a present under our tree with my name on it. I'd shaken it for weeks, dreaming of the dollhouse I'd wanted. Christmas morning revealed nothing inside. Mom had forgotten to fill it, overwhelmed with Dad's chemotherapy schedule. She'd cried harder than I did. "Sometimes the promise is emptier than the box," she'd said, words that branded themselves into my memory. Now I placed my own empty box under Victor's tree, but this one was a promise I intended to keep. Inside my bedroom closet, behind a panel I'd learned to remove silently, sat the real presents, 3 USB drives, each encrypted with different keys. The first contained the forensic accounting report, 60 pages of Victor's financial crimes documented with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. The second held recordings, Victor discussing his schemes on phone calls he didn't know I could hear from the ventilation system connecting his office to my room. The third was my insurance policy, every document, every photo, every piece of evidence backed up and ready to deploy. But the physical evidence was just part of Operation Noel. The digital component was more elaborate. I'd spent weeks setting up automated systems, all legal, all traceable back to me if needed. Emails scheduled to send at specific times, documents uploaded to secure servers with time-locked access, a website, registered in my name, fully transparent, ready to go live with a single click. The site contained a simple message: the truth about the Redwood Veterans Relief Fund, followed by documents that would make Victor's theft undeniable. The letters were already printed, signed, and sealed. One to every board member of the fund, one to the State Attorney General, one to the IRS, one to the 3 major news outlets in Maine, all sitting in a FedEx box, ready for priority morning delivery on December 26th, unless I canceled the pickup. Maya Kincaid had prepared the legal documents, a revocation of Mom's power of attorney, immediately effective, a temporary restraining order, ready to file, emergency motions to freeze the fund's accounts pending investigation, the paperwork to transfer Mom's assets into a trust I would manage until she was ready to take control again. "You're playing with fire," Maya had warned. "Men like Victor don't go down quietly." "He won't have a choice," I'd replied. "By the time he knows what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it." I'd even arranged for a locksmith to be on call Christmas morning. A domestic violence counselor was ready to come to the house. The sheriff's department had been given a heads up about potential financial fraud, though not the specifics yet. Every piece was in position. The tree lights blinked in their perfect pattern, and I found myself thinking about patterns again. Victor's pattern was always the same. Charm, control, consume. He'd done it to Mom. He'd done it to the veterans whose money he stole. But patterns work both ways. Once you see them, you can predict them. And once you can predict them, you can break them. I heard his car in the driveway. The Mercedes bought with donated funds, though the paperwork would say otherwise. Time to play my role one more time. The dutiful stepdaughter who suspected nothing. The weak one who would never fight back. I picked up a legitimate present, a tie I'd bought him, maintaining appearances, and placed it next to the empty box. The symbolism was perfect, something worthless next to nothing at all. Just like his promises to help veterans while robbing them blind. Victor entered, bourbon on his breath, confidence in his stride. "Lauren, admiring the tree? It's perfect this year, isn't it? The donors will be impressed." "It's beautiful," I agreed, not mentioning that by next Christmas, his donors would know exactly who they'd been supporting. He clapped me on the shoulder, the weight of his hand possessive rather than paternal. "Family is everything, Lauren. Remember that. We protect our own." I smiled, thinking of the USB drives hidden in my closet. I couldn't agree more. Victor, family is everything. He had no idea that in 4 days, I'd show him exactly what protecting family really meant. The art of forensic accounting is like building a prosecution case. Every number needs a source. Every transaction needs a trail. By December 22nd, I had built something that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. Using my professional skills, I'd reconstructed 3 years of Victor's theft in excruciating detail. The money flowed like this. A veteran donated $10,000 to help build transitional housing. That money hit the Redwood Veterans Relief Fund account on a Monday. By Wednesday, North Coast Outreach LLC would submit an invoice for $9,500 for housing assessment services. The invoice was paid immediately, unusual for a nonprofit that typically took 30 days to process payments. North Coast would then hire Hale Consulting for $9,000 worth of strategic planning. From Hale Consulting, the money split. $3,000 to legitimate business expenses that Victor could point to if questioned, and $6,000 that simply vanished into personal accounts. Multiply that by hundreds of donations over 3 years, $3.2 million stolen, with just enough legitimate charity work to maintain the facade. I'd created visual aids that even a jury could understand. Flowcharts with red lines showing stolen funds, green lines showing the few legitimate expenses, pie charts demonstrating that 67% of donated funds never reached a single veteran, timelines showing how donations surged after tragic events, veteran suicides, holidays, Memorial Days, and how Victor's personal purchases spiked exactly 3 days later. The smoking gun was Victor's own hubris. He'd been smart enough to use shell companies, but too arrogant to hide his signature. I'd found 17 documents where he'd signed as both the vendor and the approver, using slightly different versions of his name. Victor Hale, V, Marcus Hale, Victor M, Hale. But the handwriting analysis I'd commissioned, paid for with my own money, completely legal, showed they were all the same person. Maya Kincaid had assembled an even more powerful weapon, the legal framework to destroy Victor while protecting Mom. The power of attorney is the weak link. She explained during our final preparation meeting. It was signed under duress. I can argue that based on the pattern of financial control you've documented, the moment we file for revocation, we also file for an emergency protective order. Your mother becomes a protected party in a financial abuse case. "What about the house?" I asked. "The transfer to the Hale Family Trust hasn't been recorded yet. I've prepared an emergency injunction. The second you give me the word, I file it electronically. The court clerk is a friend. She'll make sure it's processed immediately, even on Christmas." "Even on Christmas?" Maya smiled grimly. Domestic violence doesn't take holidays. Neither does the emergency docket. I'd prepared individual packages for every member of the Redwood Veterans Relief Fund Board. Each contained a personalized letter explaining how their reputations were being used to legitimize fraud, a USB with the complete evidence file, printed copies of the most damning documents, highlighted and annotated, a timeline showing when they could have discovered the fraud if they'd been reviewing the books, a legal opinion from Maya stating their potential personal liability if they didn't act. For the media, I'd prepared something different. 3 years of Victor's public statements about helping veterans, juxtaposed with evidence that he'd been stealing from them. Photos of him at charity galas next to spreadsheets showing donations diverted that same week. His LinkedIn posts about servant leadership paired with his personal credit card statements showing luxury purchases funded by charity theft. The IRS package was the most technical. Form 13909, the tax-exempt organization complaint, filled out with surgical precision, every box checked, every supporting document attached. I'd calculated the estimated tax fraud, $847,000 in unpaid taxes on unreported income, plus penalties and interest that would triple that amount. For law enforcement, I'd prepared a criminal complaint that read like a textbook case: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, each charge supported by specific evidence, cited down to the document number. I'd even included a prosecution memo, suggesting how they could build the case for maximum impact. But the masterpiece was the package for the bank. Banks are required to file suspicious activity reports for potential money laundering. I'd identified 43 transactions that should have triggered SRs, but hadn't. By presenting this to the bank's compliance department, I'd force them to either file retroactive reports, admitting their failure, or become potentially liable for facilitating money laundering. The scheduled emails were all queued up. December 25th, 11 o'clock a.m., right when Victor would be pouring champagne for Christmas brunch with his country club friends. Every board member, reporter, and law enforcement contact would receive their packages simultaneously. The website would go live. The story would break everywhere at once, too big and too documented to bury. "Why Christmas?" Maya had asked. "Because that's when he's hosting half the city's power brokers. They'll all be there when the news breaks. He won't be able to spin it, hide it, or run. He'll have to stand there and face it, in front of everyone he's been lying to." I ran through the checklist one more time. Every document backed up in 3 locations, every email scheduled, every legal filing prepared. The locksmith on standby, Maya ready to file the emergency orders, the domestic violence counselor prepared to support Mom. Tomorrow was Victor's donor reception. In 3 days, his world would collapse, and unlike the veterans he'd robbed, he'd see it coming just long enough to realize he couldn't stop it. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow and the smell of coffee that couldn't mask the tension in the air. Mom was already in the kitchen at 7 a.m., preparing the elaborate brunch Victor demanded for his invited guests. Her hands shook as she arranged the silverware, the good set that had been her mother's. "You don't have to do this," I said softly, pouring her tea instead of coffee. She always preferred tea when stressed. "It's Christmas, Lauren. We keep the peace on Christmas." Peace, as if we'd ever had that with Victor in the house. By 9 a.m., Victor was in full performance mode, wearing his $3,000 suit, paid for, I knew, with funds meant for homeless veterans. He was arranging papers on the kitchen table when I walked in for more coffee. Lauren, good. I need Denise to sign these before the guests arrive." He pushed the documents toward me. "Maybe you can explain to her that this is for everyone's benefit." I looked down. Transfer documents for the house. Today, he wanted to steal my mother's home on Christmas morning. "Mom's busy cooking your brunch," I said evenly. "Perhaps this can wait." "It can't." His voice carried that edge I'd learned to recognize, the one that preceded his controlled explosions. "The notary is coming with the Richardsons at 11. It needs to be done before they arrive." Mom entered, wiping her hands on her apron. "What needs to be done?" Victor's smile switched on like a spotlight. Just the paperwork we discussed. Honey, for the trust, to protect our assets. I thought we were waiting until after the holidays. Tax purposes. It needs to be filed before year-end. The lie came so smoothly. Lauren was just saying she'd help explain the benefits. I watched Mom's shoulders slump, even now, even on Christmas. He couldn't let her have one day of peace. Something inside me shifted, like a switch flipping from wait to now. Actually, I said, I don't think Mom should sign anything without reading it thoroughly, or without independent legal advice. The kitchen went silent except for the coffee maker's gurgling. Victor's mask slipped for just a second, long enough for me to see the real him underneath. Lauren, this is family business. Exactly. And family protects each other, Mom. You don't have to sign anything you're not comfortable with. Denise, his voice dropped to that dangerous register. Tell your daughter to mind her own business. Mom looked between us, caught in the crossfire she'd always tried to avoid. Maybe we should just sign it. Victor grabbed the pen, pressed it into her hand. Now. No, I stepped between them. She's not signing anything. The slap came fast, hard enough to snap my head sideways. My cheek exploded with heat, and I tasted copper where my teeth cut into my cheek. But I didn't fall. I didn't even step back. Mom screamed. Victor raised his hand again, then seemed to remember the guests coming in 2 hours. His hand lowered, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. You ungrateful— I'm done, I said quietly. Pulling out my phone, I took a photo of my face, the red mark already rising on my cheek. Then I hit the emergency contact I'd programmed. 911. 911. What's your emergency? Domestic violence incident at 47 Maple Ridge Drive. I need officers immediately. Victor lunged for the phone, but I stepped back, keeping the dining table between us. I'd also like to report financial fraud involving the Redwood Veterans Relief Fund. The perpetrator is Victor Hale, and he just assaulted me. You stupid girl. You have no idea what you're— I have 3 years of evidence. I continued to the dispatcher. Documents proving $3.2 million in charity fraud. I'm sending them to the FBI, IRS, and State Attorney General right now. I pulled up the prepared emails on my phone. My fingers steady despite the throbbing in my face. Send all. 43 emails fired off simultaneously. Every board member, every authority, every news outlet. The website went live. 3 years of preparation, triggered by one moment of his violence. Victor's phone started buzzing. Then Mom's. Then the landline. What did you do? His face had gone pale. I gave everyone their Christmas presents early. Check your phone. Victor, I think the board president is calling. He grabbed his phone, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, rage, then fear as he read the incoming texts. Board members demanding explanations. The bank alerting him to a freeze on the fund's accounts pending investigation. A reporter asking for comment on the documentation they'd just received. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. You destroyed everything, he snarled. No, Victor, you did that yourself. I just documented it. Mom was crying. Holding the unsigned papers, I went to her, wrapped my arms around her. It's over. Mom, you're free. The sirens were outside now. Our quiet Christmas morning was about to become very loud, but for the first time in 5 years, I felt like we could actually breathe in our own home. The doorbell rang at 10:47 a.m. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a suit. The domestic violence advocate I'd been told would accompany them. Behind them, a process server waited with a manila envelope. Officers, Victor said, switching to his public persona as he opened the door. There's been a misunderstanding. Family disagreement that got out of hand. You know how holidays can be. Sir, we need to speak with Lauren Pierce, the female officer said, looking past him to where I stood with Mom. That's me. I stepped forward, my cheek still burning. The mark was darker now, a perfect imprint of Victor's hand. The advocate approached me while the officers positioned themselves between Victor and us. "Lauren, I'm Sandra from Crisis Services. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm okay. I photographed the injury and sent it to my attorney." "Your attorney?" Victor laughed, but it sounded hollow. "For a family squabble?" The process server stepped forward. "Victor Hale, I have emergency orders for you." He handed Victor the envelope. "Temporary restraining order and revocation of power of attorney for Denise Hale. Effective immediately." Victor ripped open the envelope, his face reddening as he read. "This is ridiculous. Denise, tell them—" "Mrs. Hale," Sandra interrupted gently. "You don't have to say anything. The revocation means Mr. Hale no longer has any legal authority over your finances or property." Mom's phone rang. She answered with shaking hands. "Hello? Yes. This is— What? Frozen? But how did you— I understand. Thank you." She looked at Victor with something I hadn't seen in years. Clarity. "That was the bank. They said all the accounts you controlled have been frozen pending investigation, but my personal account, the one from before we married, that's been released back to me." Victor's phone was ringing nonstop now. He answered one call, and I heard him saying, "No, I don't know how she got the records. That's impossible. Those invoices were legitimate." The male officer spoke up. "Mr. Hale, we've been instructed to wait here for federal authorities. The FBI will want to speak with you about the fraud allegations." "This is entrapment," Victor shouted, pointing at me. "She set me up." "I documented what you did," I corrected. "Every stolen dollar, every fake invoice, every veteran you robbed." A knock at the door interrupted us. The locksmith I'd scheduled stood there with his toolkit. "Miss Pierce, I got your emergency call. Ready to change those locks?" "What? You can't change the locks on my house." Victor moved toward the locksmith, but the officer stepped in his path. "Sir, the restraining order requires you to vacate the premises. You have 15 minutes to gather personal belongings under officer supervision." Sandra handed Mom a card. "Mrs. Hale, we have emergency housing assistance if you need somewhere safe to stay." "She's staying here," I said firmly. "He's leaving." More vehicles pulled up outside. Through the window, I could see news vans and unmarked federal vehicles. The quiet Christmas morning in our upscale neighborhood was becoming a crime scene. Victor's phone rang again. He answered, and his face went ashen. "What do you mean the entire board received—" "Yes, I saw the website. No, I can't explain right now." "That would be board member Richardson," I said, recognizing the number on his screen. "He was supposed to come to brunch, remember? Probably calling to cancel." An FBI agent entered, showing credentials. "Mr. Hale, Agent Martinez, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding allegations of wire fraud and money laundering." "I want my lawyer." "You can call them from our office." The agent turned to me. "Miss Pierce, we've received your documentation. Very thorough. We'll need a formal statement, but it can wait until after the holiday." The locksmith was already working on the front door. The mechanical clicks of tumblers being changed sounded like freedom. Victor was escorted to the door, an officer on each side. He turned back one last time. "Denise, you're making a mistake. I love you." Mom stood straighter than I'd seen her in years. "You loved my money. You loved my house. You loved controlling me. But you never loved me." As they led Victor away, I noticed the empty box under the Christmas tree, still wrapped in its silver paper. I picked it up and handed it to the FBI agent. "What's this?" he asked. "A reminder." I said, "That's what Victor gave to every veteran who trusted him. An empty promise. Nothing inside but disappointment." The agent looked at the box, then at me. "The evidence you provided, it's some of the most comprehensive documentation of nonprofit fraud we've seen. You did this yourself?" "I'm a compliance specialist. I just applied my professional skills to a personal problem." The house suddenly felt larger with Victor gone. Mom sank into her chair. The unsigned transfer documents still on the table. She picked them up, and without a word, fed them into the shredder by the desk. "Merry Christmas, Mom," I said, sitting beside her. "Merry Christmas, Lauren." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you for giving me my life back." By 3 p.m., the Redwood Veterans Relief Fund Board had assembled for an emergency session, half gathered in the conference room at the Raven Harbor Marriott, the other half joining virtually, their faces arranged in a grid on the projection screen like a jury about to deliver a verdict. I sat at the witness table, my laptop open to the presentation I'd prepared months ago but never thought I'd actually deliver. Mom sat in the gallery behind me, Sandra from Crisis Services beside her. The mark on my face had darkened to purple, but I wore it like evidence. Board President Patricia Richardson called the meeting to order, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Miss Pierce, we've reviewed the materials you sent. Before we proceed with formal action, we need to understand the full scope of what you're alleging." "It's not an allegation," I said, pulling up the first slide. "It's documented fact. Over 3 years, Victor Hale systematically embezzled $3.2 million from the fund through a network of shell companies." The flowchart appeared on screen. Red lines for stolen funds, green for legitimate expenses. The room collectively inhaled. "This is how it worked," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Donation comes in Monday. Invoice from North Coast Outreach LLC appears Wednesday. Payment processes immediately. Unlike your standard 30-day cycle for legitimate vendors, North Coast then hires Hale Consulting. From there, the money disappears into personal accounts." "How did we miss this?" asked Thomas Chen, no relation to anyone despite the name, the fund's treasurer, his face pale on the video screen. "Because Victor handled vendor management personally, because he provided just enough legitimate receipts to make the books appear balanced, and because none of you ever requested primary documentation for vendor services." "That's an accusation against this board," Richardson said sharply. "No, it's a statement of fact. Here are your board meeting minutes for the last 3 years. I pulled up the documents. Vendor services were discussed exactly twice, both times. Victor provided summary reports that you accepted without question. Your fiduciary duty requires more than that." An older board member, Colonel James Murphy, leaned forward. "Young lady, are you suggesting we're complicit?" "I'm suggesting you were negligent. There's a difference, legally speaking, but that difference disappears if you don't act immediately now that you know." I clicked to the next slide. Screenshots of the 43 transactions that should have triggered investigation. Any one of these should have raised red flags. The fact that your treasurer never questioned them. "I trusted Victor," Thomas Chen protested from the screen. "Trust isn't oversight." I shot back. "You trusted him with money donated by veterans. For veterans, every dollar he stole was a betrayal of someone who served this country." Richardson raised her hand for silence. "What do you want, Miss Pierce?" "I don't want anything, but here's what needs to happen." I pulled up my final slide. A list of demands. 1. Immediate termination of Victor Hale and ban on any future involvement with the fund. 2. Full forensic audit by an independent firm. 3. Cooperation with all law enforcement investigations. 4. Restitution to the fund from Victor's personal assets. 5. A complete restructuring of your oversight procedures. "And if we refuse?" asked another board member. "Then the website stays up. The media keeps getting updates, and you all become defendants instead of victims. The IRS is particularly interested in whether board members benefited personally from any of Victor's schemes." The room erupted, board members shouting over each other, voices from the screen overlapping in chaos. Richardson slammed her gavel, an actual gavel she'd brought to the hotel conference room. "Motion to terminate Victor Hale effective immediately," she announced. "Second," Murphy said instantly. "All in favor?" Every hand rose. Even Thomas Chen raised his virtual hand. "Motion to authorize full cooperation with law enforcement and engage an independent auditor." The vote was unanimous again. Victor chose that moment to burst into the room, his lawyer trailing behind him. "You can't do this without me present. I'm the executive director. Not anymore, Richardson said coldly. Security? 2 hotel security guards appeared. Richardson had come prepared. This is that girl's doing. Victor pointed at me, his composure finally cracking. She's been planning this, stalking me, breaking into my office. I documented your crimes, I said calmly. Using publicly available information and my professional skills, every piece of evidence was obtained legally. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Victor shoved him away. Denise put her up to this. They're both… Mr. Hale, Richardson interrupted. The FBI is waiting for you in the lobby. I suggest you go with them voluntarily before this becomes even more of a scene. Victor's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his face went white. What did you do? I knew what he was seeing, the notification from his bank. The SAR filing? That was automatic once the bank reviewed the transactions I highlighted. Your accounts are frozen. Victor, all of them. You destroyed everything I built. You built nothing, Colonel Murphy said, standing. You stole from veterans and called it charity. Miss, Pierce just showed us what you really are. As security escorted Victor out, he turned one last time. This isn't over. Yes, I said, meeting his eyes. It is. The room stayed silent until the door closed. Then Richardson turned to me. Miss Pierce, would you consider joining our board? We clearly need someone with your attention to detail. Mom spoke from behind me, her voice stronger than I'd heard in years. She'll think about it. Right now, we have a Christmas dinner to finish. The red and blue lights painted our living room wall in alternating colors, like the world's saddest Christmas decoration. It was 5 p.m. on December 25th, and instead of carving turkey, Victor Hale was being led to a federal detention facility in handcuffs. I stood at the window, watching the convoy of law enforcement vehicles disappear down Maple Ridge Drive. Behind me, Mom was on the phone with her sister in Portland, crying but laughing too, the kind of emotional release that comes after years of holding your breath. Yes, Carol. He's really gone. No, Lauren handled everything. You should see her. She's like some kind of avenging angel with a spreadsheet. I turned from the window to find Agent Martinez still in our living room, going through the last box of evidence I'd compiled. He looked up, shaking his head in something between admiration and disbelief. Miss Pierce, in 15 years of financial crimes investigation, I've never seen a civilian build a case this airtight. Have you ever considered federal law enforcement? I'm good where I am, I said, placing the final envelope on the table. It contained everything: backup drives, original documents, recorded conversations, the handwritten ledger that Victor thought was so clever. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about Victor. It's about every veteran who got an eviction notice because the transitional housing fund was empty. Every widow who was told there wasn't money for her husband's memorial. Every soldier who needed help and got Victor's empty promises instead. Martinez picked up the photo I'd included from the fund's website, showing Victor shaking hands with a homeless veteran at last year's Christmas dinner. We ran the numbers based on your documentation. The $3.2 million he stole could have housed 48 veterans for a full year, or provided mental health services to over 200. Make sure the judge knows that, I said. My phone buzzed with notifications. The story had broken wide. 3 news outlets were running it as their lead, complete with the documentation I'd provided. Victor's mugshot was already circulating on social media. The headline on Channel 6 read, Christmas Day Takedown: How One Woman Exposed Charity Fraud. Richardson called to inform me that the board had voted to liquidate Victor's assets through civil forfeiture. His house, his Mercedes, his country club membership, everything purchased with stolen funds would be recovered. The veterans would get their money back, with interest. There's something else, she said. We found additional victims. 3 other nonprofits where Victor was a consultant. Your documentation gave us the roadmap to uncover it all. As Martinez prepared to leave, he handed me his card. You'll need to testify when this goes to trial. Are you prepared for that? I've been prepared for 3 years, I said. After everyone left, Mom and I sat in the quiet house. Our house, finally ours again. The Christmas tree lights twinkled, and for the first time in years, they didn't feel like a lie. "I need to tell you something," Mom said, pulling out a folder I'd never seen before. I wasn't as naive as I seemed. I knew something was wrong, but I was scared. Lauren, he controlled everything, the money, the house, our reputation. I didn't know how to fight him. Inside the folder were her own notes, dates, amounts, suspicious conversations. She'd been documenting too, in her own way. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I saw you becoming who you needed to be to stop him, every time you came home from work, talking about compliance and investigations. I knew you were learning, building strength. I couldn't fight him, but I could wait for you to be ready." We held each other then, two women who'd survived a different kind of war. By 10 p.m., the house was quiet. The locksmith had installed new deadbolts. The security company had activated our new alarm system, and for the first time in 5 years, we'd eaten Christmas dinner in peace. I pulled out my laptop one final time, typing a message to the Veterans Support Network forum where I'd been lurking for months, learning about the real needs Victor had ignored. The Redwood Veterans Relief Fund is under new management. The person who stole from you is in federal custody. Every penny will be recovered. Every veteran who was denied help will get priority assistance. This Christmas, you gave me the courage to fight for justice. Thank you for your service. Justice has been served. The responses came immediately. Veterans from across the state, some crying with relief, others offering their own evidence of Victor's crimes. The network that Victor had betrayed would now help convict him. I closed the laptop and looked at the empty box under the tree, still wrapped in silver paper. Tomorrow, I'd throw it away, but tonight, it stood as a monument to promises kept. Victor had given our family nothing but emptiness and lies. In return, I'd given him exactly what he deserved, the truth, wrapped in federal charges and tied with a bow of inevitability. Mom raised her teacup in a toast to the best Christmas present ever, our freedom. To freedom, I agreed, touching my cup to hers, and to the veterans who'll finally get the help they deserve. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the tracks where the police cars had been. By morning, it would look like none of this had happened. But in federal holding, Victor Hale was learning that some gifts can't be returned, some damage can't be undone, and sometimes, the person you dismissed as weak is the one strong enough to bring you down. The tree lights blinked their steady rhythm, no longer perfect, but honest, just like our family would be from now on. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story of justice and courage resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you.